my boobs look good in that, actually. Hey Glamour, I'm Toni Collette, and today we're going to be breaking down some of my best character looks. Hilarious.
There are people who don't need noise to be seen. They don't chase spotlights or applause. They simply walk into a room, and the air changes. Toni Collette is one of those people. Born on November 1st, 1972, in the suburbs of Sydney, Australia. She grew up far from the glitter of Hollywood, but somehow, she was always meant to tell stories. Stories about truth, about pain, about the small, invisible moments that make us human. Every year, a birthday is a reminder. For some, it's candles and wishes. For Toni, it's reflection, a quiet look back at the path that made her who she is. "I never wanted to be famous," she once said. "I just wanted to be good." Simple words. But in those few words lives an entire philosophy. The idea that success isn't about being seen, it's about being felt. Today, we celebrate not only the day she was born, but the light she has carried through decades of storytelling.
Wow, this is insanely confronting. Thank you so much to the Television Academy for recognising our show in this way. And I'd like to acknowledge my fellow nominees. I'm so humbled to be here in this room, let alone up on this stage. I have a piece of paper. I'd like to thank Steven Spielberg for allowing me to be part of his imagination.
A light that doesn't blind, it warms. A light that doesn't scream, it listens. Look at her eyes in any film. There's always something unsaid, a secret, a storm, a wound. That's her gift, turning silence into emotion. From Muriel's Wedding to The Sixth Sense, Little Miss Sunshine, and Hereditary, each performance feels like a conversation between her heart and ours. She never plays a role. She becomes the truth of it. But before the fame, before the awards, before the world even knew her name, there was a little girl in a small house in Sydney, pretending to be someone else, not because she wanted attention, but because imagination was the safest place she knew. That's where this story begins. In a world obsessed with loudness, Toni Collette chose stillness. In an industry chasing perfection, she chose honesty. And maybe that's why her work endures, because we see ourselves in her imperfections, in her courage, in the quiet resilience behind every trembling smile. So today, on her birthday, we don't just say happy birthday, Toni. We say thank you. Thank you for reminding us that gentleness can be powerful, that empathy is art, and that being true is the greatest thing an artist can ever be. Being true is the greatest art. Toni Collette. Happy birthday, Toni Collette. Your light still begins every time the world grows quiet.
Every journey begins long before the first applause, before the spotlight, before the name becomes a headline. For Toni Collette, the story begins in the western suburbs of Sydney, a place of small houses, working-class streets, and skies that always seemed to hold more dreams than people could reach.
I find it very cleansing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I did it, it was my 25th birthday.
Yeah.
I was in Mexico. I had too much tequila, and I trusted this guy's kind of plump hands. I thought he's doing it.
Her father, Bob, drove a truck. Her mother, Judith, answered phones in a customer service office. They weren't artists. They were survivors. Practical, kind, tired. But inside that little home was a child who watched everything, who listened to voices, studied faces, and wondered what it would feel like to live inside someone else's heart. She was shy, but curious. Sometimes she'd sit by the window and invent stories about neighbors she barely knew. She'd imagine them happy, sad, broken, and somehow it always felt real. At school, she joined plays mostly to escape gym class. But once she stepped on stage, something shifted. The noise in her head turned into purpose. The nervous energy became electricity. She didn't yet know it, but that moment, that feeling of becoming, would define the rest of her life. Toni once said, "Acting found me before I found myself." And it truly did. In those years, money was scarce. Her parents couldn't afford private lessons or fancy costumes. Yet they never stopped her from dreaming. They simply said, "If you love it, do it honestly." That honesty became her compass. By 16, she made a decision few teenagers could imagine. She left school to chase the stage. No safety net, no guarantee, just instinct and an almost reckless belief that storytelling was her calling. She joined a local theater company, small stage, peeling paint, audiences of 50 people on a good night. But to her, it felt like Broadway. She memorized scripts by candlelight, practiced voices in front of the mirror, and learned that art is born not from comfort, but from courage. Every rehearsal was a lesson in humility, every failure a secret investment in the artist she would become. Still, the world outside didn't understand. Teachers whispered she'd thrown her future away. Friends found real jobs. Toni waited tables, saved coins for bus fare, and carried a notebook filled with monologues she wrote between shifts. At night, she'd stand on her small balcony and promise herself, "One day, I'll make them feel something." The first break came almost by accident. A casting call for a small Australian play needed someone raw, untrained, authentic. Toni auditioned with trembling hands, expecting rejection. Instead, the director saw something rare: truth. For the first time, her imagination became currency, her vulnerability a gift, her accent, her laughter, her very Australianness. Suddenly it all mattered. The applause that night wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to tell her that the dream wasn't foolish. It was possible. 2 years later came the audition that would change everything. A quirky little film called Muriel's Wedding. The producers wanted someone funny, heartbreaking, real.
The next time I did it was for friends. Actually, I'd been in Nepal and India with her, and her fashion show was inspired by the hill tribes of Nepal, so she asked me to be in it. I shaved my head then. Then I met my husband, and 3 days into what we now know is a relationship, I shaved my head to test him, see if he still liked me when I looked like that.
Toni arrived in second-hand clothes, hair tied back, no makeup. She read the lines once. The room went silent. Then someone said, "That's Muriel." It was the beginning of everything, but also the end of the girl who doubted herself. Looking back, Toni described that period as chaotic, messy, but honest. She was learning the hardest truth of all, that to create something genuine, you must risk being seen completely. And so from the working-class streets of Sydney to the world's grandest stages, a quiet revolution had begun. Not the revolution of fame, but of feeling. Because Toni Collette didn't come from privilege. She came from empathy. And empathy, when nurtured by courage, becomes art that lasts forever. Every story has an origin. Hers began with a girl who believed that imagination could change reality, and then proved it true.
Every star has a moment when the world finally sees what they've been trying to show all along. For Toni Collette, that moment arrived in the most unexpected way, through a story about a girl who wanted to belong. The film was Muriel's Wedding, a small Australian comedy that no one expected to travel beyond its shores. Yet somehow, it did, and so did she. When the cameras rolled in 1994, Toni was just 21. She had no entourage, no stylist, no plan B. What she had was instinct and a willingness to look foolish in the pursuit of truth. Muriel Heslop was awkward, insecure, painfully hopeful. She dreamed of weddings and pop songs, of being loved by a world that barely noticed her. In many ways, she was Toni herself, raw, unfiltered, and real. During filming, Toni gained 18 kilograms to fit the role. It wasn't about appearance, it was about honesty. She said later, "If I'm going to play her, I have to wear her skin." When Muriel's Wedding premiered, audiences laughed, cried, and then stood to applaud. Critics wrote, "A star is born, not from glamour, but from truth." Overnight, the shy theater girl became Australia's most talked-about actress. Award nominations followed, magazine covers, late-night interviews. But behind the applause, Toni stayed grounded. She still lived in the same apartment, still rode the same bus. Fame hadn't changed her, it had simply found her. Then came Hollywood, and with it, a test few Australian actors had passed before. Would her honesty survive the machine? The answer came in 1999, with a whisper that would echo around the world: The Sixth Sense. In that film, Toni played the mother of a haunted boy, a woman stretched thin by love and fear. No monsters, no makeup, just emotion. There's a scene near the end. She sits in a car, tears trembling in her eyes, as her son tells her he can speak to the dead. For a few seconds, the world disappears. It's not acting anymore. It's truth. And in that truth, millions cried. That single performance earned her an Academy Award nomination. Not bad for a girl who once rehearsed lines in a Sydney kitchen. Hollywood wanted more, but Toni never wanted to repeat herself. She turned down roles that didn't speak to her heart. She said, "I'd rather fail being real than succeed being fake." Throughout the 2000s, she moved between drama and comedy with the ease of someone who understood people, not just characters. From About Boy to Little Miss Sunshine, she brought empathy to every frame. When Little Miss Sunshine arrived in 2006, it was supposed to be a small film, 7 actors in a yellow van. Instead, it became a phenomenon. Audiences around the world fell in love with its imperfect family, and with Toni's quiet strength as the mother who held them together. She didn't steal scenes, she anchored them. She didn't demand attention, she earned it. With silence, with sincerity, with truth. As her career blossomed, awards followed. A Golden Globe for United States of Tara, an Emmy, dozens of nominations. But for Toni, trophies were never the goal. She once said, "Success is waking up excited to do what you love and being kind while you do it."
Mr. Carlyle.
Doctor, how about that?
Please lay down.
Can you read minds?
That philosophy became her compass through the chaos of Hollywood. Even as her name appeared beside giants, Toni never built walls around herself. She walked red carpets, then took her kids to school the next morning. She filmed blockbusters, then returned to small independent projects that spoke to her soul. It wasn't about career strategy, it was about balance, the art of staying human in a world that sells perfection. Every generation needs artists who remind us what authenticity looks like. For the late 1990s and early 2000s, that artist was Toni Collette. She proved that emotional truth can outshine special effects, that vulnerability, not vanity, is the real mark of power. From the tiny theaters of Sydney to the grand stages of Hollywood, she had climbed, not by ambition alone, but by empathy, craft, and courage. Her rise wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a steady light growing brighter with every story she told. And yet, even as she stood at the top,
A question began to whisper in her heart. After all the applause, what happens when the lights go out? Because every rise carries a shadow, and Toni's next chapter would test her in ways fame never could. Every ascent has a price, and every artist, no matter how bright, must one day walk through shadow. For Toni Collette, that shadow arrived quietly, not as scandal, but as exhaustion. Years of constant travel, endless interviews, sleepless nights on distant film sets. The world saw the smiles. They didn't see the cost. By the late 2000s, she was everywhere, starring, producing, promoting. Every new role demanded another piece of her heart. And slowly that heart began to feel empty. She once said, "I gave so much that I forgot how to simply be." Fame had not corrupted her. It had consumed her. Behind the red carpet photos were missed birthdays, jet-lagged mornings, and the quiet ache of balancing motherhood with art. She loved her family more than anything, yet the work that fed her soul was the same work that kept her away from them. The irony was painful. The actress who could express every emotion on screen was struggling to understand her own. There were moments of panic, sudden tears before interviews, the strange emptiness after applause. Success had brought recognition, but not peace. During one performance, she confessed later, she stood backstage and thought, "I don't even know who I am when the curtain falls." That thought frightened her. In 2010, she won an Emmy and a Golden Globe for United States of Tara. It should have been a celebration. Instead, she felt a kind of silence inside. The series, about a woman living with multiple personalities, hit closer to home than audiences realized. Playing those fractured selves forced Toni to face her own fragmentation. Who was she outside of the characters? The wife? The mother? The performer? The answer, she said, was blurry. As the decade turned, the fatigue deepened. She began turning down roles, disappearing from publicity. Rumors whispered. Burnout, illness, retreat. In truth, she was searching for stillness. For months, she lived quietly in Australia, away from cameras. She walked beaches at dawn, cooked for her children, and tried to remember what ordinary felt like. But even silence can be loud when your life has been applause. In those years, Toni faced something no award could fix: the weight of expectation. Hollywood wanted her to keep delivering the same brilliance, but she needed to rediscover why she was doing it at all. There's a kind of grief that comes with success, the grief of losing the person you were before everyone knew your name. And Toni carried that grief quietly, never dramatizing it, never selling it. She just paused. Friends say she spent that time reading, meditating, and writing notes for a film she might direct one day. Not a blockbuster, something small, human, healing. She was rebuilding her spirit, one silent morning at a time. Out of the stillness came perspective. She realized that fame and artistry were not the same, that to keep creating truth, she first had to forgive herself for being human. So she made a choice: to work less, live more, and choose only stories that spoke to her soul. That decision would reshape everything that came next. In 2018, she returned with Hereditary, a film so raw and unsettling that critics called it a masterclass in emotional terror. But to Toni, it wasn't horror, it was catharsis. In that role, a grieving mother crushed by loss, she poured years of unspoken exhaustion into every scream, every whisper. It was the sound of release. And when audiences gasped, Toni exhaled. She had found her truth again. The comeback wasn't measured in awards, though they came. It was measured in peace. For the first time in years, she felt whole.
Every artist must fall to remember why they rise. For Toni Collette, that fall was not a failure. It was a return. Because sometimes the bravest thing a star can do is step out of the light and learn how to shine from within.
Every fall carries within it the seed of change. For Toni Collette, that change began not with a new role, but with a question whispered in the quiet hours of the morning. What if I stop chasing and start choosing?
An electrocomplex, is it?
I wouldn't know about that, but you're not as hard to read as you think, lady.
Kate Blanchett. We are going to present her as one of the grand dames of that period of cinema.
After years of exhaustion, she found herself back home in Australia. No entourage, no scripts waiting on the table. Just time. And in that time, something remarkable happened. She started listening. To the ocean outside her window. To her children's laughter echoing down the hallway. To her own breath. It was the sound of a life returning to balance. In interviews, Toni later admitted, "I'd spent so many years pretending to be other people that I forgot how to be myself." So she rebuilt, quietly. Morning walks replaced late-night flights. Journaling replaced red carpet rehearsals. The woman who once lived in scripts was learning to live in silence again. And then, one ordinary afternoon, a script arrived that felt different. It wasn't glossy. It wasn't safe. It was honest. A story about resilience, courage, and second chances. The title, Hearts Beat Loud. She read it once, twice, and felt something stir. It wasn't ambition. It was gratitude. That small independent film reminded her why she began in the first place. To tell stories that mattered. To make people feel seen. When the movie premiered at Sundance, critics spoke again of her warmth, her depth, her quiet fire. But for Toni, the victory wasn't on the screen. It was in the process. Working with kindness, sleeping well, laughing between takes. She called it the most peaceful shoot of my life. After Hearts Beat Loud, she began saying yes only when her heart said yes. Projects with meaning, not marketing. Roles that scared her in a good way. And so came Knives Out, Stowaway, Pieces of Her. Each one chosen not to rebuild fame, but to explore truth. Her choices reflected her evolution. Stronger women, complex mothers, quiet fighters. Characters who fall, break, and rebuild. Just like her. Through these stories, Toni rediscovered joy. The camera was no longer a cage. It became a mirror. She learned to separate success from self-worth, work from identity, noise from meaning. There's a moment in Pieces of Her where her character says, "You can't keep running from what you are." Toni later revealed that line hit her personally, because it was true. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing, firm, whole, and quietly radiant. The turning point wasn't a single event. It was 1,000 small decisions made with intention. To rest, to forgive, to trust time. She no longer measured life in projects, but in peace. When friends asked what changed, she smiled and said, "Nothing. Everything. I stopped trying to prove and started to be." That simple shift transformed not only her career, but her presence. You could feel it in interviews. Less guarded, more grounded. You could see it on screen. Still intense, but freer, lighter. The world had known Toni Collette the actress. Now it was meeting Toni Collette the woman. She began mentoring young Australian actors, reminding them that the journey isn't about fame. It's about empathy, endurance, and truth. She told them, Your art can only go as deep as your humanity. That became her mantra, and it showed. Every performance after that carried a new energy, not the nervous drive of ambition, but the quiet power of purpose. She had learned that vulnerability is not weakness, it's wisdom. From the outside, it looked like a comeback, but from within, it was something deeper. A woman rediscovering her essence, an artist falling in love with the work again. Every story reaches a crossroads, the place where loss meets renewal. For Toni Collette, that crossroads became a sanctuary. Because sometimes the turning point isn't a destination, it's a decision. To live fully, to love gently, and to shine quietly. There is a moment in every artist's life when creation no longer comes from ambition, but from peace. For Toni Collette, that moment marked her rebirth. After years of searching, she had finally found balance, the delicate space between family and film, between purpose and peace. The woman who once measured life in premieres and awards now measured it in mornings at home, laughter in the kitchen, and the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work. She had learned that joy doesn't shout, it whispers. And in that whisper, she began again. Her return wasn't loud. It was deliberate. Roles chosen not to impress, but to express. In 2018, Hereditary reminded the world of her intensity. But her next chapter proved something deeper, that she could transform darkness into wisdom. In Knives Out, she laughed her way through chaos with perfect comic timing, proving that vulnerability and humor are two sides of the same truth. In Stowaway, she commanded a spaceship with quiet strength, and in Pieces of Her, she carried the weight of generations, showing how survival and tenderness can live in the same heart. Each role felt like a conversation with her younger self, the girl who once rehearsed monologues in a small Sydney apartment. Now, that girl's dream had become a legacy. Toni's rebirth wasn't about fame returning. It was about rediscovering gratitude. She once said, "I'm lucky. I get to tell stories for a living, but the real privilege is living the story I have." That humility defined her achievements more than any trophy ever could. In recent years, she began producing films, mentoring young talent, and using her platform to support causes close to her heart: environmental protection, mental health awareness, equality. Not for attention, but because it felt right. She never needed to speak loudly. Her kindness did the talking. Colleagues describe her as the calm in the storm. Directors call her fearless. Actors call her the one who listens. And fans around the world simply call her real. Her achievements stretch far beyond the screen. Dozens of acclaimed performances, nominations across the globe. And yet, when asked which moment she's most proud of, she smiles and says, "Raising my kids. They're my greatest work." That answer reveals everything about her evolution. The girl who once sought belonging through characters found it through love. Even now, she continues to choose the unexpected. Independent dramas one year, animated adventures the next, always following curiosity, never repetition. She says, "If the story scares me a little, it's probably worth telling." That courage keeps her art alive. Toni Collette's rebirth is not a return to the spotlight. It's a deeper understanding of light itself. She knows that every role, every heartbreak, every laugh was necessary to shape the artist she became. She doesn't chase the top of the mountain anymore. She tends the ground beneath her feet, and that is her greatest achievement. Not fame, not fortune, but balance, the quiet harmony of a life well lived.
Today, when she steps onto a set, there's no rush, no fear, only presence. She looks at her crew, her fellow actors, and you can almost hear the unspoken gratitude in her voice. We get to do this. How lucky are we? For the audience, Toni's journey feels like a lesson that rebirth isn't about changing who you are. It's about coming home to yourself. And as the camera fades, one truth remains. Toni Collette has not just survived the industry, she has transcended it, leaving behind not noise, but meaning.
Every story must end, but some lives refuse to fit between the words, "the end." Toni Collette's journey is not a tale of fame or fortune. It is the quiet evolution of a human being who learned how to turn pain into purpose, and purpose into peace. From a shy girl in suburban Sydney to an actress whose eyes could move an audience without a single word, her path has never been straight. It has been real, messy, courageous, beautiful. There are faces we remember because they're famous, and there are faces we remember because they make us feel. Toni belongs to the second kind. For 3 decades, she has reminded us that strength can be gentle, that humor can heal, and that the truest art is honesty. As she enters this new chapter of her life, she stands not at the top of a mountain, but in a clearing, surrounded by gratitude. She no longer runs from the spotlight nor chases it. She simply walks in her own light. Look closely and you'll see it. The small smile before a scene begins, the deep breath between takes, the quiet nod to a camera operator, the respect for the moment. It's the same light that's guided her from the beginning, the one that shines not on her, but through her. Every film she's ever made, every role she's ever played, was really a conversation with us, a reminder that being human is messy and magnificent at the same time. When she talks about acting now, she doesn't mention technique or fame. She talks about empathy, about listening, about the shared heartbeat between storyteller and audience. She says, art isn't about pretending. It's about remembering what it means to be alive. And perhaps that is the lesson she leaves us with. To live truthfully, to forgive often, to keep loving, even when it hurts. Because in the end, we are all stories, fragile, unfinished, and beautifully human. On quiet mornings, Toni still writes in her journal. Sometimes it's about a dream she had. Sometimes it's about gratitude for the simple things, the smell of coffee, the sound of her children laughing, the ocean outside her window. She no longer measures her life in scripts, but in moments of presence. That is her masterpiece now. The critics call her versatile. The industry calls her respected. But maybe the truest word is awake. Awake to her craft. Awake to her life. Awake to the light within silence. And so, as this story closes, we celebrate not an ending, but a continuation. The understanding that art, like life, is always becoming. Being true is the greatest art. Toni Collette. Her words echo softly, like a benediction. Not only for actors, but for anyone who dares to live honestly. So tonight, wherever you are, if you look up at the sky and see a single steady star, not the brightest, not the loudest, but the one that feels closest to your heart, remember her story. A girl from Sydney, a woman of empathy, an artist who taught us that silence can shine. Happy birthday, Toni Collette, Thank you for the stories, for the courage, and for showing us the truest light is the one we carry inside.